when the internet hit us in the 90s, my daughters had been talking to me about a website. I think they probably brought it up first. And, I was thinking that's probably going to be a fad. I'm not thinking outside the box yet.
Welcome to The Transfer, where we explore how business leaders are driving change and transformation in their industries. And today we're continuing our focus on automotive. So I am super excited to have a seasoned dealership veteran with me today, Gene Manweiler. He spent decades at the helm of his family-owned Chevrolet dealership. Gene, I know you recently retired in the last few years, but you have a wealth of knowledge and insights from the many decades navigating this business. So, first off, thank you so much for being here. I'm so excited to have you.
Well, Carolyn, thank you for inviting me. And I like your seasoned adjective there. That's very polite. But,
We
it's been a pretty good journey to be a fourth generation dealer in a family business that basically lasted 92 years until COVID hit, and things changed, and didn't get my 100th anniversary like I hoped on, but my wife and my kids are happy that I didn't.
they want to spend time with you, right? But man,
Yes.
92 years is no small feat. So absolutely a testament to a great business, the longevity that came with it. So, well, why don't you give us a little bit of, I know that 92 years is a lot to cover. So, but at least tell us about your journey, kind of at a high level and how you've steered through that many decades of change, right? Like a family business in and of itself can be challenging. Then you layer in just how constantly the world is shifting, technology is changing. I'd love to hear just how you kind of handled that throughout your career.
Well, just being fourth generation, I don't know if you've ever tried to work for your dad or your mom. It has its challenges. Just, I don't care what kind of business you're in, there's challenges there. And, my dad survived working for his, and I survived working for my dad. But I got to be at the dealership at a young age, watching the two interact with customers. Just black and white difference between my grandpa and my dad. My grandpa was very personable to the customers. My dad was all business. He didn't really have time for customers. And I think I take it after my grandpa's side of it, stopping to shake hands no matter how busy you were. I learned that from watching my grandpa back when I was in junior high working at the dealership. It's in the records that grandpa kept and the stuff that his advertising. I saw what a genius he was with an eighth grade education to run a Chevrolet dealership. Pretty impressive, making it through the dirty 30s, and
The dirty.
pretty impressive background he had.
I love the fact that you kept all of those kind of legacy advertising pieces, right? Such good memories that you can look back on and also see how far things have come and evolved over the last 90 years.
Yes, it's going cleaning out an office space that we had. I was the first person probably to clean that out and organize it, and I'm finding all this stuff. Wow, you know, I mean, I was pretty impressed. It's fun. It's kind of going down memory lane that I didn't live in that time frame, but I could see what was going on just by looking at the old newspapers and stuff. And our World War II Art Deco building that my granddad had built during World War II, we did research to try to get it on the National Historic Register, which we did. We're successful at doing that. So I learned a lot more than I was ever told by my dad.
I love that. So, give me a little bit of an example of a significant challenge or maybe pivotal moment you've have faced during your time as a dealership owner. I'm sure there are probably a couple that would come to mind, but something that really like pops up is a challenge that you had to navigate through.
Um, Probably in my early stages of life, getting along with my dad was probably the challenge. I hadn't earned his trust yet. Knowing what was going on, my ideas he thought were just way off out there in space. It's proven to him, things would work like, for instance, the only time we got used cars in my dad's era is if we traded for them.
Okay.
Well, I can sell a lot more used cars if I could get. So I started going to get program cars, rental cars. I started doing that. It made him really nervous about doing that. And I kept a spreadsheet for about 2 years showing him what the expenses, floor plan insurance, what floor plan interest was, and here's how much we made, Dad. And it's probably one of the first times in my life that he said, "Son, I'm proud of you." You know, he didn't give too many compliments in his life. That's probably the first challenge, is trying to show him that I did get an education, that I do know what I'm talking about, and not taking anything away from him, because he was a very sharp businessman also.
It's sometimes hard to look at your children as not your children, right? And he had to make
Yes.
that shift of you being his business partner and a colleague, but that family dynamic's always still probably underneath a little bit, right?
Yeah, it is. But you know, my youngest daughter worked for me for 5 years, and I thought we had a great relationship. It was never like I had with my dad. But I learned from watching her I mean, she reminded me of my grandpa, August Manweiler, how good she was with customers. And, you know, that a little bit of that reminded me and rubbed off on me. But I'd say my youngest daughter and I had a lot better relationship in the dealership than what my dad and I did.
You may have approached it a little differently, right? Knowing the experience
Yes, I
you had to.
probably did. I probably have a little bit more of my mom's gentle genetics in me than what I had my dad's rough genetics, but it was all good.
So that's a great example from, like you said earlier, in your tenure on the dealership side. So give me something a little bit more recent.
2001, we had a tornado come through wiped out a third of our community. And luckily, the dealership was not damaged. We were on the south end of town. The tornado went through the north end of town. We ran out of inventory like in 5 or 6 days. I had one friend that lost his dentist office, business, and his house, and he was living out of the back of his van. In fact, his daughter moved in with us and lived with us for like 6 months. You just did things in small community to help each other. And I ran out of inventory. I was pretty much gave stuff away at what cost was, because I was trying to help people. And I had a couple dealers make contact with me. One was a used car dealer out of Salinas, Kansas, and he offered to bring used vehicles. He wasn't selling to me. He just said, "Hey, I'll just set them there." And we actually parked them out in the country. I live east of town out here, because there was so much damage in town we couldn't get to the parking lot. And he just kept bringing me used cars. After I saw him, I sent him a check, and it provided inventory for my friends and family that were looking for vehicles. And then I had a new car dealer out of Cheney, Kansas, that just called me up. "Hey, Gene, whatever you need on my lot." You know, we had computer systems where I can look and see where inventory was. We used to do dealer trades all the time. We still do. But most of the time they want something back. And uh, Rick Luber told me, "Gene, anything you see is yours." And, you know, to have people, they didn't have to do that. I didn't contact them, they contacted me. So that was pretty special. So that was one challenge. Then probably the next toughest challenge was 2009, when the economy went down the drain.
Yeah.
General Motors went bankruptcy, and they're telling us out all this information. They're going to wind some dealers down. They're going to cut their dealership. When they got through bankruptcy, there was a Black Friday, and FedEx was going to deliver to dealers their wind down letters. "We no longer are going to have you participate in our franchise." And every time FedEx truck would go by, my employees, it was a very solemn moment.
Yeah.
Everybody just kind of held their breath, and man, we made it through the day. The next day, I started getting phone calls from my friends that lost their business. Um, anyway, make a long story short, our dealership survived, and we were the only Chevrolet dealer for several months in a 7-county area.
Oh, wow.
That was huge. And that, you know, what's GM going to expect of me? I'm already starting to go to community events in other towns, just put my face out there. That was kind of a challenging thing, but I had the support of my family and of my employees that all were gracious to help us. It it was a nervous time, but kind of an exciting time because we saw a lot of possibilities coming out.
Did you ever get any, I guess, reasoning? Was it based on sales? Like why G?
If they're going to shut you down, they had what they call the DART score, and it judged on your total sales efficiency in your market area, your customer satisfaction index. There was like 4 or 5 different variables. You had to have a DART score of 100. And if you didn't, you got a wind down letter. Well, our DART score was like 127.
Oh, nice.
So I was high, and then I looked up our DART score the last month that I was in business 5 years ago, October when we closed. My DART score was like 270. I was at top 5% in the whole state in every category. So things changed, and I attribute that to great employees I've had. I had 14 employees for our 90th anniversary. We had a chamber come in, had a coffee there, and I had all my employees, all 14 of us. I said, how many's been working here for 1 year? 3. And then I had some that had been there 40 some years. The 14 of us had 244 years of service to Manweiler Chevrolet. And you just don't find that very much anymore.
Wow.
And I preach that to both my daughters. When you get a good job and you like it, stick where you're at. I don't care how green the grass looks down the road. If you like what you're doing, money's not always everything.
What do you think was some of the keys to, I don't know, the management style that helped retain such a loyal sales team? What were you doing different?
Um, Treat your employees like human beings. Treat them like their family. And it was a family. When we went through this bankruptcy with General Motors, and we didn't know if we were going to survive the cuts, we had the community came together, my employees. I had like 30 ambassadors. We all put on neon yellow shirts. Had an event out in the city park. City officials there, county officials were there, trying to send a message to Chevrolet. Look, we need this dealer. And just the support we had from our community and my employees and friends and family was phenomenal.
I love
That's
what a sweet and it
I didn't do it all by myself. I had a lot of
had a
support
lot of
crew.
help.
Yes.
Well, thank you so much for kind of that background. There's definitely have navigated some really tumultuous times. And again, you wouldn't expect anything different with 92 years under your belt. I know you had mentioned experiencing some of the early days of kind of digital and the digital marketing side and your website. And I'd love to hear you talk a bit about, I know you were open about your skepticism in some of that. So what was that part of your journey like, having a business that still is, people coming in person, having that experience with someone, someone on the sales team, but then the layering in of this whole kind of different world and the digital side of things. Love to hear some of that.
When the internet hit us in the 90s, my daughters had been talking to me about a website. I think they probably brought it up first. And, I was thinking that's probably going to be a fad. I'm not thinking outside the box yet. But, the more we got closer to it, I thought, it'd be pretty cool. So I started thinking of websites, the addresses, the URL I could get. And ManweilerChevrolet.com would have been impossible for any of my customers to spell and get it right. And back then, you had to have it pretty accurate when you typed it in to search.
Yep, it
And
wasn't
so
as
I come down
sophisticated
and
as
it just M Chevy, 6 letters.com. I created my website and I had fun communicating that to the public in a way that never, when you listened to the ad, you didn't know who the ad was for or anything. It was kind of a teaser ad. I made the ad up. I was in the ad with another radio host and mchevy.com. I said, what is that? The guy said, what are you talking about? I said, mchevy.com. I heard about this. I got to check it out. Mac Chevy? No, not Mac Chevy. M Chevy. I spelled it out. MCH. You're getting married? No. Like he was hard hearing. I said, no, mchevy.com. And if you don't want to miss out on some great deals, you better check out our mchevy.com. And nobody knew what that was. Of course, the M Chevy should have told you a little bit about it. But our web traffic increased over 1,000-fold.
Wow.
A website that my daughter, sophomore in high school, created. I was pretty tight. I mean, I was pretty cheap back then.
Well, you're like, it's a fad. What's the
But
internet? It was
yeah,
so early.
but that was very successful. And it was nothing uncommon for us to be selling, in surrounding states, especially when we'd have family and friends tell their friends. And we probably sold 3 or 4 states around us. But with the internet, we expanded that. We sold vehicles in 16 different states. I actually had a giant map of the United States with a pin point at Hoisington with strings going to all the different places we sold. I think the furthest we sold was New York City. We sold a Monte Carlo there that was an SS pace car on eBay,
Oh my God.
and so it expanded our sales. Averaging $2 to $3 million in sales. We went up to $9 to $10 million in sales. And that was phenomenal for a small town, 2,500 people.
Okay.
And we had a state map also. We had 116 communities in Kansas that had customers of ours. So internet was a eye opener. That's the biggest, even though I thought it was a fad, that has changed the world. And now we're getting into AI. I know we'll talk about that a little bit later, but it's phenomenal. And my favorite part of doing business was the marketing side of it. Should be exciting for dealers that are out there now.
The fact that you had such a sales bump, did that really make you a believer in terms of like, yeah, you can look at web traffic and all that, but you're like, wow, fundamentally expanding the footprint of where you're selling and that uptick, did that get you more comfortable in dabbling in other things digital from the
Yeah,
marketing perspective?
yes, it did. But there was digital advertising when it first started coming out. And I want to say that was when I saw it was right after the bankruptcy, because Chevrolet made us participate in some programs of theirs, and we had to go with the vendors they choose. And it just seemed like all those guys was after was a paycheck, and I had no way to tell if anything was working. Whereas on my newspaper, my TV, my radio ads, I could track to see what worked and what didn't. I had spreadsheets of what I spent each month. I could track to see what was working.
Okay.
Digital was a whole different world. And it kind of come down to the point you had to find a digital company representative that actually cared about you, your business,
Mhm.
and build that trust with them. I think some of the money that I first spent on digital was wasted money.
Maybe, yeah, a little bit of experimental, right? Uh,
Yes, it
well,
was.
and you want transparency. That's the most important thing. And if you didn't feel like the, Chevrolet
Yes.
level kind of, top-down programs were giving you that, it wasn't going to help your faith in if it was
No,
working or not,
no,
right? So, no, that
right.
makes a ton of, you totally can understand why you would feel that way and want someone working and doing that for you that you actually have a connection with. It's much like buying a car, right? You build trust and you build a rapport, and it may be the place then you go back to.
That's the secret to successful sales.
Hmm. So I'd
Any
love to
salesperson.
I'd love to hear a bit about other ways you've kind of had technology impact your dealership operations. Could be service, could be customer experience, but were there some things over the course of your history where you're like, man, I was really glad I got that software or that DMS, something like that was a really sticks in your mind as an important evolution to how you were doing business?
Probably the one part of digital that I had the most fun with was geofencing.
Ah.
One of the Chevy dealers within 10 miles of us sold out to another Chevrolet dealer, and they were having grand opening, and I would geofence that block that dealership was on, and I got amazing how much traffic I got after that. Anytime I wanted to focus on a big event or something, I would geofence that big event, whether it was in surrounding towns or for on a local thing. Probably the best way I could measure if digital advertising was working for me.
And
But other
amplify.
than that, it's really tough. I wasn't to that level I figured it out yet.
Well, I love that it came back to marketing, right? You can tell that was like where your sweet spot,
Yes,
sweet spot
yes,
of, of your work experience lied, right?
yes.
Well, I'd love to shift gears a little bit to kind of leadership and your legacy, right? So being able to lead a dealership for a very long time, that requires, I think, a very strong leadership style. And I'd love to hear a bit about what those principles were that you tried to instill into your team, into your people, into just the way that you ran things.
Probably the thing that helped me most when you talk about leadership was joining. Now, you're too young to even know what this organization was, but we used to have a junior chamber of commerce, later became JC's.
Okay.
Have you heard of that?
Oh yeah. Yes, yes, yes.
Okay. We had a chapter start in Hoiston, Kansas. There was 20 of us that started, and within 3 months I was president. But it was a leadership training organization. And I attribute a lot of my success in sales even to the JC organization, serving, volunteering for community stuff within your community. And I've always been very competitive. And I found out that other JC chapters were competing to see who could be the best chapter in the state of Kansas. So my officers and we recruited. I think we ended up having like over 200 members in a small town of 2,500
Wow.
by the end of my term, and we started 8 new chapters in other communities, just talking about the need for this kind of thing. And in JCs, they kicked you out when you turned 40 years of age.
Ah.
Yeah, yeah. So, and since the internet come out, JC's pretty much you don't find too much of that anywhere. But I'd say I got my leadership just interacting with people, just on one-on-one, uh, observing great people that become congressmen and stuff, how they handle people. I got to be in the mix of some pretty great leaders. And I attribute that to how I use that in my business.
So
Plus,
like a sponge, just
yes, yes.
absorb there.
And, you add that to what I learned watching my grandpa, August Manweiler, conduct business. You add all that together, it made it pretty easy doing it. It's just common sense stuff. Be nice, and treat people nice.
Sometimes it's so easy to overcomplicate it and forget those like fundamental human basics, right?
Something else you'll find unusual in the 44 years that I was the general manager, I only had to let 2 employees go.
Well, when you have them staying for 40 years, you're doing something right. So I guess the stat of only two doesn't surprise me.
So I mean, that speaks, well, having the employees stay with us for 40 some years. I mean, one of the employees I had during my tenure worked for my grandpa and my dad and me. So he got to see all three of us. So but I think I was the best, but I never asked him that.
You never put him on the spot to
No,
confirm.
I never did put him on the spot.
Well, why don't you tell me a little bit about the book you published? So, M. Chevy, the 92-year legacy of Manweiler Chevrolet. I think writing a book is such an incredible accomplishment. Give me a little bit of background on kind of what led you to that and
Okay. In Hoisington, we have an e-community that's part of Network Kansas. I think Kansas gets funding from the Commerce Department and tourism. And I'm on the e-community board in Kansas, and it's kind of tied into the Chamber of Commerce. And always looking for ways to increase business, bring business into Hoisington, Kansas. And we learned of a boot camp that was in Longmont, Colorado. And the gentleman that ran this boot camp, his name was John Shallert. And I had to write up a mission statement that made our dealership stand out from any other dealership. What makes you different? Well, that's when I come into the historic building that we were in, the world's largest neon Chevy bow tie and sign that we use to market it, as you see on the front of my book. They had a graduate class a year later. I went to that. And John Shallert says, Gene, you need to write about your family. You need to preserve that as a book. I guarantee all your customers will want to read it. It just helps bring focused attention on the success your family's had. And I met an advertising guru from New York State that had done corporate advertising. He won an award. It's called the Grand Effie
Oh
Award, which
yeah, I've come from
I don't
marketing and
have a clue
advertising.
what that
That is
is.
Effie Awards are some of the most coveted things, and they're hard to get. They're hard to win. So it's an
Well,
accomplishment.
anyway, he had worked for an advertising firm in New York, and he increased Nabisco's sales like $420 million in his ad campaign. And he liked family business stuff. Well, through John Schaller, we were introduced at this second boot camp. I showed him a picture of our dealership. He says, you care if I come out and just snoop around in your dealership? I says, man, I just love this stuff. So he flew out here from New York City. We were getting ready for our 90th anniversary. And I had all Grandpa's old newspaper display ads, old memorabilia, all out on tables and big panels to display stuff. And he says, I'm like a kid in a candy store. He says, Gene, I've done a lot of family businesses. This is a gold mine. And he took over 1,000 pictures.
Oh.
He took pictures of our neon sign. I had to put him in a forklift and lift him up. Every 2 minutes, he took a picture of as the sunrise and as the sunset of our sign to get that best photo. But he helped us come up with some T-shirts, helped do a quad fold that we had getting ready for our 100th anniversary. I had 1,000 quad folds printed up.
Goodness.
And that was a fun thing. And the book come out of that. And I started the book back then, and I think the dear Lord helped me finish it. I live out in the country. I used to custom cut wheat. And one of my farmer friends said, hey, you want to ride in a combine? They were cutting wheat right next to my house. And when I got done, I jumped out of the combine, landed in a badger hole, and I had a triple fracture of my heel,
Oh,
calcaneus. And so I was on my back for 6 months. Guess what? I finished the book. I'm happy with it. You know, unless you know my family or my town, you know, this isn't a top 100 bestseller by any means, but it is for my community and my family, and it preserved the.
like I said, writing a book isn't not everyone can accomplish that. I think that being able to have, really documented that really great legacy for your family is going to be a gift for all of your future generations too. They're going to
And
want
I put lots of old photos in it for the guys like me that don't like to read books.
throw in a few pictures. Yep, never
You
hurts.
know, I threw it, in fact, the guy, the editor that helped us put it all together, he didn't really want to put all these pictures in. Well, I'll put it in the back of the book. And then he said, when we got all done with the book, he said, those made the book.
Yeah.
After you read the story about the history of the family and what all happened, that and those pictures, that just made the book. So I said, well, good. I'm glad you like that.
You want both. It's stronger with both, right? The words and the
Yeah.
visuals.
Oh, absolutely.
Well, I think it's so exciting to have that documented. So good for you. Good for you,
Yeah.
Gene.
Thanks.
All right. So one last question before we wrap up. If you were to give one piece of advice to today's dealership owners, grappling all the things that you've talked about, right? The evolution of dealing with manufacturers, the marketing, the technology evolution, what would be kind of your piece of advice to leave to those still in the industry?
In 44 years of being a dealer operator, I've gone to a lot of Chevrolet meetings, met a lot of dealers, and there's some dealers that just blow you off because you're not important. And their businesses are kind of the same way. You know, when you look at their sales, they don't have a lot of repeat sales. Bring yourself down to the customer. Just because you're rich, bring yourself down to our level and treat your customers like human beings. Give them respect, just like you should be doing your employees. And treat them like they're your only customer that you have. That would be my advice. Be sincere, build their trust. That's what it's all about. It's not all about just counting in the numbers, who can get the most sales. What's fun in that? You know, it's not all about money. And I've taught my kids that it's not all about money. Be happy in life and be proud of what you do.
How you treat people matters. I love that. That is a great, I think, parting thought. Gene, thank you so much for bringing your perspective. You've clearly seen a lot in your in your career, and I think you gave us some great wisdom on your journey. So appreciate your time. For those of you who would love to check out Gene's book, M. Chevy, The 92-Year Legacy of Manweiler Chevrolet, you can find it on Amazon. So an easy search.
And I think the price of it's like $16 or $17 now. I didn't want to make any money on the book. And then the publishing costs went up, so I had to raise the price like 95 cents. I hope you sell a lot from your podcast because I make 22 cents on every book I sell. I'm
Clearly,
gonna
like
get
you said,
rich.
money isn't everything, right?
That is exactly right, Carolyn.
Well, this is going to wrap up this episode of The Transfer. And thank you again for your time.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I appreciate it.